Hey folks, welcome to Thinking Theology. I'm Don. I'm taking a look at a short, and it is an atheist to Christians. Generally, I suppose, that God does not own me. I don't know the setup here. I'm not quite sure who's on it. I may have glanced at it like a month ago when I grabbed it from the net. But it's fresh to me. So all I'm going to do is take a look at it and then analyze the arguments and what's being said. So let's see.
What you're saying is you just don't agree with it, that God can allow us to suffer if he compensates us. Like if someone came to my house and tore it up and then gave me a bunch of money, I'd be highly inconvenienced nonetheless to have to fix everything. I'd still be mad even if I was grateful for the money because it's my house, not theirs. But this is God's house. So he's sovereign over it.
I don't see myself as a part of God's house. At best, I would see myself as a visitor within God's house who had no choice but to be in God's house. If I was in my own house and I dragged somebody into my house through no choice of their own and then forced them to undergo some suffering and then threw some money at them and said, I have the right to do this because firstly, this is my house, and secondly, I've compensated for it. So if anything, you should be grateful. I think this would be gross.
Right, because when human beings exhibit that kind of autonomy over other human beings, we call that slavery.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Interesting. Now, I mean, I had no problem with the development of thought. And that's not to say that I agree or disagree with it. I look at it as a function of the strength of an argument, the premises being used, and what is being concluded from it is a reasonable. It's like anybody who studied law knows it right away. You learn what the reasonable man, or it's probably now the reasonable person standard. Is it reasonable given what you understood at the time to draw a certain conclusion, that I was in dire circumstances and I had to use deadly force on that person or what have you. And in this case, it doesn't make sense based on the assessment. Is the assessment a fair one? And I think it is. About suffering, the analogy, I did like the way he developed that about being brought into someone's house and then being made to suffer purposely. There's more that could be said about that, and I'll say a little bit about it. I didn't like the slavery analogy because I think that was over the top. Not that that's a false equivalent, but I just think that that was a bad analogy because in one sense, okay, you're not forced. It isn't by force that you're born. So that's a bit different. But we are born into circumstances that are hostile. And we have to count on our parents to keep us alive. And because as human beings, as infants, we're incapable of that. We would die after birth if just left to our own. And that is true for a number of years, that we would die if left to our own devices. Then the world is a very harsh place. People aren't nice to each other, and then eventually you become aware of your own mortality and you die. Eventually, that's just the way it goes. So the analogy isn't a good one between slavery, but the point is well taken that you're in a place, and the word compensation is interesting. And I actually think, I would have been offended by it decades ago, but I actually think it's a good word. Because, okay, according to the New Testament or many Christian expositors say that if you accept, like Romans 10, 9, and 10, if you confess Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. All right, there's your compensation at the end. You get eternal life. But in the meantime, you've got to suffer. You go through this world like everybody else, and it's brutal. Whether you admit it or not, life on planet Earth is brutal. And I knew a guy who used to wear a t-shirt, it's like 30 years ago I knew him. I haven't spoken with him in 25 years or so. He said, like, you know the expression, life's a bitch, then you die? Well, this was a takeoff on that. His t-shirt said, life's a joy, then Christ returns. And my thinking is, have you taken a look at what life is like? Even if you're a Christian, so to speak, and you believe God's grace and mercy, and you're experiencing this high from being connected to God, at least your conception of God and the dynamic of your life, regardless of whether you're willing to acknowledge it, this life is very difficult. You cannot trust people. You can trust some, of course, in your life, but people will lie. They will try to steal. I mean, it's a very difficult place. You walk down certain streets at night, depending on where you live, you might get shot, stabbed, robbed. I mean, it is a place where you have to watch your back. And not in a paranoid way, but we're so used to living that way in the way that we don't know who to trust. There are concerns for our safety in various places, for instance, that makes living in this world inhospitable. All the while in the back of our mind, sometimes on the forefront of our mind, we realize that our own mortality, continues on. So life's a joy, then Christ returns. All right, I'm not going to try talking anybody out of that perspective. It just didn't happen to be mine. Anybody who was close to, according to the text, look in the Hebrew Bible, anybody that was close to God wound up having bad things happening to him. In the New Testament, anybody that was close to Jesus wound up having very bad things happen to them. So the idea that the closer you get to God or Christ, the better things are, is not substantiated even in the texts. But the word compensation is an interesting one. Believe God raised Jesus from the dead, confess Jesus as Lord, and you'll be compensated later for it. Fair enough. I mean, I get it. It's not fully my perspective, but it's not completely divergent from it either. So from an argument standpoint, I get it. And these guys didn't seem douchey in ways, and I know Christians can be douchey or absolutely dickish. I get it. And so can atheists. Anybody can, no matter what stamp, religion, political party, or whatever, sports team, anything, anybody. You've got your good folks and you've got your douchebags. And these guys seem fairly rational. Just here's why I think what I think. And the compensation package doesn't quite work for me. The argument could have been strengthened a bit. But then again, I'm just seeing a short, so I don't know what other parts of the argument were left out and who does the editing in these shorts. I don't know if it's AI or not, or how the shorts work in that regard. But all right, folks, there you go. Leave your comments. This is just about what makes sense, and I think that it's more of a conciliatory approach where we can have divergent opinions on things. We can root for different teams, but we don't have to be nasty in context to one another. That's my take anyway. All right, there you go. Have at it. I'll see you on another video. Have a great day and keep thinking theology.